Hi there, I am going to show you how to make these really easy hamburger buns from items out of the pantry. Today I wanted to use up some whole wheat flour that has been sitting in my pantry. So we're going to start off by warming up some butter. You could do this in the microwave, but I like to do it on the stove because then I can add my liquid, in this case milk. I can add my liquid into the butter and warm it together. So this recipe you could use 3 cups of water, or you could use 3 cups of milk. Today I've chose to use half milk and half water, so 1.5 cups of milk. And then I also added 1.5 cups of water to this and warmed it up so that it was all one consistent temperature. I would say like a lukewarm temperature. And you don't want to make buns using cold water, and it's really important to use dechlorinated water. So I had a kettle that was sitting on my countertop, and I also had filtered water, and I was using that. So there was no chlorine in the water. I find the best results for making any type of yeast dough is to use non-chlorinated water because you are working with live bacteria. So to get non-chlorinated water, you could use water that had been sitting out for 24 hours or water that had been boiled and then cooled. I will be linking my recipe down in the description below, so you will be able to take a screenshot of that. But I just basically warmed up the 1/2 cup of butter, 3 cups of liquid, and then I added it into the big mixing bowl. Now I'm adding 4 tablespoons of sugar. I'm using granulated cane sugar, organic. It has a little bit of a brown tinge to it, and the reason I'm adding it into this is so that we have something for the yeast to eat. You could use honey if you chose to substitute that instead. Any type of food for yeast would work here, and so I just use 4 tablespoons of sugar. So next I am adding 2 large eggs is what the recipe calls for. I have pullets that are laying eggs right now, so I have some very small eggs. So I end up using 3 eggs to make this. Now I should mention you could be doing this same recipe. You could do this in a stand mixer. I don't use a stand mixer, but you could definitely use this in the stand mixer, and I would just add it all in and then just start mixing it is basically what I would do, but I don't know if that's correct because I don't use a stand mixer, just so you know that you don't have to do this by hand. So I'm choosing to do 1 egg at a time and adding it in, giving it a little whisk. And that's because my chickens are young layers. A lot of them will get blood spots in their eggs where blood vessels have ruptured. It's okay to eat, but it's not something that I want to add to my buns. So to prevent any blood spots or imperfections from the eggs going into my dough, I'm cracking them and then adding them individually one at a time. Now I am adding salt. I like to add salt not together with yeast. I like to add salt where there's a barrier between the two. So if I put salt into a recipe, I will add it into the liquid mixture and dissolve it, and then add the yeast separately, and I'll show you that in a minute what I mean. But next I wanted to grab this out of the pantry. I have this bag of whole wheat flour and I wanted to use it up. So there was 2 cups of flour that I used in this recipe of whole wheat. Tyson does not like, Tyson's my husband, and he doesn't like whole wheat bread. So this is my way of making whole wheat and sneaking it in so that he will still eat it. So these are very light whole wheat. He didn't know, he didn't even notice that there was any in here. So if you wanted to make the buns more heavy, you could use more whole wheat. I just used 2 cups of whole wheat, and then the rest of it was white flour. So I am using quick rise yeast, and quick rise yeast, you don't have to proof it. This was a brand new jar that I had opened a few days ago. And so I am adding 6 teaspoons of yeast. I sometimes will add 7. In this case, I ended up adding about the equivalency of 7 because my teaspoons were heaping, and it's because I was using a whole wheat flour. I wanted a little bit more lift. So that was just what I did as a preference. It's not something that's necessary. The recipe does call for 6 teaspoons of yeast. Now, if I was using not like a traditional yeast, I would have had to proof it. And that's not what this video is showing you. So this is based on only using quick rise yeast. However, you would just follow the instructions, and I would not add the salt into the liquid of the yeast and liquids and like the eggs and milk and butter. I would add the salt into the flour when I was mixing it, is what I would do differently if I was using a traditional yeast. And it's because salt and yeast can affect each other's effectiveness and whatnot. So the recipe I use calls for 8 to 10 cups of flour. So what I like to do is I like to add in flour, and then I don't even keep track. And it's because there's no exact measurement when it comes to working with dough like this. Your humidity is going to be a factor. The type of flour you're using is going to be a factor. Everything will alter how much you're going to be needing for flour. So what I do is I add about 6 to 8 cups, and then I just add more, like 6 to 8 cups total. So I had 2 cups of whole wheat. Then I added, I think 4 or 6 cups of whole or regular flour, and then I got that going, and then I just continued on from there, adding as I needed. And the dough will come together and not be sticky. Like this is a really sticky dough right now because it's hydrating. And sometimes what I like to do is I just like to take my time with dough because it needs time to absorb and hydrate itself, and it needs time to activate. So being a little bit patient in the beginning when your dough is hydrating, it actually it helps you a lot. Sometimes if it's really tricky, I will just give it like 30 seconds to a minute to hydrate itself, and then start working with it, and it'll come together a little bit easier. As you can see, it's really, really sticky, and I'm wanting to pull this out of this bowl and start working it on the countertop. So before I started, I made sure I cleaned my countertops really well, and I'm going to sprinkle some flour down on the countertop so it won't stick. The dough won't stick while I'm working with it. And then I'm just going to be turning this out onto the countertop here and trying to get as much flour and all the bits and pieces out of the bowl as I possibly can. And then I'm just going to start working it. And this dough, you don't need to work it a lot. It just, as soon as it comes together, you just kind of work it and then you let it rest. It's really easy. This dough is super easy to work with, and I find that the warmer it is, the better it comes together, the better it works, but you don't want it hot. So the temperature of the milk in the beginning, it really is a key factor of how this dough comes together. And the more you make this recipe, the more you kind of find with your humidity and your temperature in your home, what temperature you need to have that milk and butter at when you first start. It's going to change. It really does affect how this comes together. And I've learned that because when I've made this recipe here compared to other places where the humidity and temperature is very, very different, there's always a different result with different starting temperatures of that beginning phase of starting the liquids in the very, very beginning. So to get this dough to come together, I'm basically just kneading it, not being too forceful. I think it took about 10 to 15 minutes to get this to come together. And like I said, you could use a dough mixer. I don't use one. I just do it by hand. It's an excuse to turn on a YouTube video and listen to somebody or watch somebody on YouTube, like one of my favorite channels, and get caught up on what's going on in the world, or listen to a podcast. That's what I do. So after a few minutes have gone by and you've worked the dough, what happens is it kind of starts to pull on the countertop a little bit. It's not sticking, but it's using the countertop to kind of activate the gluten in the bread. And I would like, sometimes when I make bread, I like to be able to do the bounce test. So when I push on it, it'll bounce out and I know that it's been activated. This recipe for making these hamburger buns, I don't really focus on that. I just want to make sure it's really good and hydrated, and it's a really nice, easy to work with dough. I do like it to bounce back a little bit, but you don't have to knead it to the point where when you poke it with your finger, it will bounce out, like back out immediately. This is a forgiving recipe for making these type of buns. So I decided to call it. It wasn't, doing the bounce test, I could push on it and it wasn't going to rebound immediately, and that was fine. So I decided to let it rest and let it do its first rise. So to prevent the dough from sticking to the bowl, I've added some olive oil, and I'm just going to smear that around. I like to make sure that I have enough oil so that I can coat the entire dough ball so that it can stay nice and hydrated and doesn't get like crusty. Mine did anyway because I didn't use plastic wrap to cover it during the rise, but typically you want to keep it from drying out. So I'm covering it with a clean dishcloth, but you could put plastic and then the dishcloth, and that would prevent it from drying. So this has been proofing for about an hour. I went and did chores, rising for an hour, and so now it's time to punch it down. So when it comes to about double in size, it could even go longer, but it was ready to punch down, and that's it. I just punch it down and then let it rise again, and it took another maybe half an hour to come up again. But it'll depend on the temperature of your kitchen and all kinds of things. So it can go an hour. You could also punch this down too again and then let it rise again. I've done multiple rises on this and it still works out fine. It just depends on time and what you got time for. So I'm spraying my baking sheet, and I typically would rather use butter because butter is better at making it not stick than oil is, in my opinion, from my experience, especially on this pan, but I used what I had. And so basically what I'm doing is I am making little balls of dough. It's pretty simple process. I know you can do the rolling kind of way, the fancy way on your countertop. I can't do that because I have injury that it's really painful for me to do that. So I just do this old style by pulling and pinching on the bottom of the bun and then making it flat. So when you're trying to build tension, and that's basically all you need to do is just build tension for the gluten fibers to activate and make a nice bun. So as you can see, I just flattened it out and pressed it down and just made it as circular as I possibly could, and just made it flat because it's going to rise. And remember, these need to be able to fit a hamburger patty, so you want them to be quite round and like quite a big diameter and as flat as you can, so they aren't going to be too big to bite into, right? So I'm just repeating this process over and over and over until all the buns are made. And you can let these rise and then push them down again and then let them rise again in bun form as well. I've had to do that before where they were ready to bake and I needed to go do something. I didn't have time to manage the oven. So I just push them down again, just like a punch down, but I just press them down, and then they rose up again and they were baked up just fine. It's a very forgiving recipe. It's kind of a no-fail for me. It's my no-fail recipe. And so yeah, it's just time consuming to kind of go through and do this. You could, make a bunch of balls and like dough balls and then put a parchment paper over it and then take a rolling pin if you wanted to be more quick about it, making the shapes. But this is, again, just turn on a podcast and an excuse to watch TV. So as you can see, I'm pulling and pinching, pull, pinch, pull and pinch, and that's how I build up the gluten in the bun. I'm trying to create an elasticity, and that's how I find works the best for me. But I'm sure there's more than one way to do this. Make buns in multiple ways, and everyone will have a different technique. This is the one that doesn't hurt my wrist and my arm, and this is the one that I found makes the nicest structure of buns and the nicest looking buns as an end result based on what I can do. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to let these rise. I will also turn the oven on to start preheating so it's really good and hot for when I'm ready for it. And the oven needs to be 375. So now we're going to, we've let the buns rise, and we're going to make an egg wash. So it's really simple. You just crack an egg and whisk it up, and then you use that to brush on. You don't want to do this before the buns are rising. This needs to be done just before you're putting them in the oven, because you don't want this sitting there. So this is something you do after they've had time to rise, and this is a good size for me. I'm happy with the rise that they've had, and I'm ready to bake them. So I'm not going to punch them down or push them down in any way. I'm just going to start brushing them. Now, personally, I don't like just doing the top of the bun. I like to go as low around the side as I can with the egg wash, because it looks nicer in my opinion. And so I try to brush the top very evenly and then kind of work around the side without getting too much on the pan. Just try to make a nice even coat on all the surfaces that are exposed. And I find it looks the nicest when they come out of the oven. Now, you don't have to do an egg wash. You could just bake them like this and leave them plain. I am adding seeds to this. So in order to add seeds to it, I need the egg wash on there so they will stick to the bun. Otherwise, if I put seeds on these without using an egg wash, the seeds will fall off and they won't stick to the bun itself. But again, you don't have to use the egg wash. You could just leave them plain. And sometimes if I do leave them plain, I will rub them with butter when they come out of the oven to make kind of like a butter bun. And really nice. It'll make a really nice texture like that. So there's options. It doesn't have to be done this way. This is a step that's optional. But if you are adding sesame seeds or poppy seeds like I do, you will need to give it an egg wash so that it has something to stick to. You could use water instead, I suppose. I've never done that. I've only used an egg. So once these are evenly coated, then you can sprinkle on top of them the seeds you desire to use. You could use pumpkin seeds, sunflower seeds, sesame seeds, whatever you decide, poppy seeds. And I'm going to use some sesame seeds that are part of my pantry challenge use up. They're on the list to get used up. So I just try to sprinkle them evenly over the top, the best that I can, one-handed. You can really have fun with the different toppings here. You could add so many different types of seeds, or even onion bits and garlic bits, and you could probably even add cheese if you wanted at this point. There's so many possibilities. Don't be afraid to try new things and experiment, because you might surprise yourself. You might find the next best thing that is your absolute favorite. These are poppy seeds, and I really wanting to start using them up. And so I decided to make these a poppy seed sesame seed burger bun, and they're really, really delicious. I really liked the way they come out. So I'm gonna pop these into the hot oven for about 15 to 20 minutes. And there you have it, homemade hamburger buns. I hope you enjoyed today's video, and I hope you decide to make some for yourself using up some of the things out of your pantry. Thanks for watching. Bye for now.